Hi, welcome to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. Have you ever wondered about taking a pile of rusty, old, vintage motorcycle parts like this and making them into something like this? We're going to show you how. Stay with us. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the garage. I'm David Schoneman. I'm glad you're here joining me. This is episode 2 of project number 2 that we're videotaping. And we're taking a 1972 BMW R75/5 that has not run in 25 years, and we're going to do kind of a vintage style restoration on it. It's not going to be a complete showroom, look like new kind of a restoration. But we're going to modernize some of the electronics, and we're going to make the bike look as much like stock as possible because it is a beautiful bike. And then it'll be a daily rider, I think, when we're done by the spring. So this is episode 2. And episode 1, we had the bike down on the floor. We just rolled it in, and I did a walk around showing you all the things that would be of concern to someone who's going to build a bike or to refresh a bike, get it back to where you want it to be so that it can be run reliably. A lot of things we have to check. I've done all that, and now I've got the lift in place. The bike is on a lift, and you can see I've been doing some disassembly on this bike. We'll go over everything that I've done so far. There are a few more things I'll need to do later, like remove the rear wheel, but I don't want to do that until I get the front wheel back on. So we'll go over things I've done so far, what the plan is, and what I've been finding that we need to take care of. So let's start here at the front once again. You can see the front wheels removed, the front forks are removed. Old turn signals, the handlebars, the entire front end of the bike has been removed. I put this part back in. This is called the triple tree. It's got a steering stem and 2 places here where the forks go, and there's a top plate that sits up here that will hold the handlebars and secure the top end of the forks. I took this apart because I wanted to take a look at the bearings inside here. We talked about this a little bit last time. There are roller bearings in here that are greased. And in as much as this bike's been sitting for 25 years, it's quite possible, and in fact likely, that that grease in there is at least 25 years old. And grease can age. It'll dry out. It'll turn kind of waxy. So I wanted to take it apart. And as it turns out, the grease wasn't bad. The bearings were well greased, not worn. The grease was not black or dirty. A little bit dried out, but it certainly would have been serviceable. But you don't know that until you take it apart. So I took it apart, cleaned it, re-greased everything, and put them back together. So the only reassembly I've done so far is to put this steering stem with the bottom triple back in. The next step will be to begin to insert the forks, get the top plate on, and put the front end back together. But I did want to take this apart to make sure that grease there was okay. And it is. It steers very easily, very lightly. There's no binding, there's no lumpiness in the bearings. If we had to, we could have replaced the bearings. Nice thing about these BMWs, even though it's a 50-year-old bike, BMW still has parts available for a bike like this. And I could have bought new BMW bearings if we needed to, but we don't need to. The forks look pretty good too. I took them apart. I actually took them off. I didn't take them apart. I don't have to take them apart. I drained the oil. The seals look pretty good. It's been sitting, so there's been no wear on the seals. There could be age on the seals, but there's no wear on them. The rubber boot, the seal's in here, by the way. The rubber boot, like I said last time, is looks very fresh, very flexible. I cleaned them, and they look brand new. We'll be putting this back together soon, too. The turn signals were, in fact, aftermarket turn signals. They were not original. And it turns out, as we said in the last series, when we built the bike from parts I had here in the shop, I have a lot of old BMW parts. I went through the parts box, and I did find old turn signals, front and rear. These are original to the model, not original to this bike, of course, but original to the model, in great shape. And in fact, they even have bulbs on them. The bulbs work. So I've got everything I need, including the front mounting bracket. These are a special part that fits over the bottom part of the triple here, and then the fork can run through it. And the turn signal snaps in place, it gets secured down, and then it's positioned here when you put the forks in. So I have those for the front end. I also have them for the back end too, for the rear. So we'll have stock lighting. A lot of times you look at the stock lighting and you think it's not very graceful looking, and it's not. They're made to be seen, not really to be seen in terms of sending the signal to someone who knows you're going to make a turn, but they're not really made to be admired as a component. So when we do a custom bike like we did before, we put on smaller, less obtrusive looking fixtures like turn signals. But in this case, I want the bike not to be exceptionally graceful or modern looking, but to look original. And these are original, so we're going to use these. I also mentioned last time that we had risers, handlebar risers, that go from the top of the top plate to the handlebar. They were not stock either, non-standard, and they brought the handlebar pretty far back. I wanted to use standard, and I tried looking for some. I was able to find these risers. This, if you're familiar with BMWs at all, you'll say this looks like it's an original part, and it's actually not. This was made by another company who was able to exactly copy the BMW riser, and I bought a set of these for about the same price as a used set of original BMW pieces. The used would have been maybe painted, or certainly dinged up, tarnished. But here I've got brand new, shiny, machined aluminum risers for the same price. They will go on to that top triple. So these are the risers we're going to use. Brand new, but it looks old, or looks stock anyway. It doesn't look old, but it is definitely the stock piece. Here's that top clamp again, and these two bolts will fit in here, and the handlebars will go through. The handlebars themselves are in good shape. They are an original part, or at least a good aftermarket. I'm not sure if they were on the bike when it was first built and bought, but they are a good handlebar. I think they'll be the right shape and size that I need. The switches I talked about last time too. The switches, I took those off, and although the switch moves, like I demonstrated before, the switch moves, and you can push the button moves, it does not make contact. So the switches appeared to be okay when we had the last episode, but when I tested them with the multimeter, I couldn't make contact. Some of the circuits worked, others didn't, and I thought, well, there's no point in trying to fix that. It's better off to just buy something new. So the question is, what do you buy? And I decided to go with, once again, the original design BMW piece. These switches, even though they were installed on a 50-year-old bike, I can buy them new, and I did. They're not cheap. Nothing's cheap, but they're high quality, and it will maintain the vintage look. They're going to be new and shinier, but they will have the same function as we had before. I'm going to replace the wiring, so the wiring for these switches will be a little bit different, but the functionality will be the same. So I got a left and right hand handlebar switch too. And the next time we have an episode, hopefully I'll have at least the front end together, maybe the switches on, and we can demonstrate those, or certainly at some point in the future. So the forks were fine. Bearings have been re-greased. We'll have front turn signals here, stock. We'll have new risers, the handlebars, and we'll have new switches that looks just like these. I'm also going to replace the tires. Tires, like I said last time, there's some dry rot on them, but otherwise they're not too bad. But we're not going to run a 25-year-old tire. I think it wouldn't be safe. So I've ordered some Dunlop tires. They'll be in next week, and we'll get those going too. These tires, it's called the K70, and it's a little more aggressive tread pattern than the bike had originally, or than had when I got it. The tread pattern on the front tire was just straight ribs, like a lot of vintage tires were. And it's fine for the street. It's the kind of tire that the bike would have had on it in many cases. And it's one that I kind of wanted to use again, but I had a little trouble finding a rear and a front matching set that were going to do the right thing. So I ended up with the Dunlop K70s, which are also a very fine tire, a vintage tire for this bike. It's a little more aggressive tread, but I think that will lend a little different look to the bike. Again, even though we're going back to stock, there is the aesthetic part of this project too. And the tires I'm going to put on, I think will make the bike look more like it's ready for real travel. These were traveling bikes. I'm going to have a luggage rack on the back. I've got some old BMW luggage I can put on there, suitcase type things. So this bike would be able to hit the road and ride cross country if that's what you want it to do. So the tires I'm going to put on, they're going to be good on the road, but also good on a dirt road too. Not a trail like some of the other bikes we've built here, but not a dirt trail in the mountains, but a dirt packed road, hard packed dirt road would be fine for that bike. And when you're taking a cross country trip or whatever, you don't want to turn around just because the pavement ends. You want to be able to keep going because you're going to get to the end of that dirt road and there's going to be more pavement there. So rather than turn around and go around, having a little more aggressive tire will allow someone to keep going if they in fact want to. So those will be in hopefully next week. Let's move back a little bit further here. You can see first off, I have the tank off. That's an obvious change. I've got some things here. We'll talk about those in a moment. But we talked about the tank last time and the fact that it had 25-year-old gasoline in it. And it took a long time to drain. There were about 2.5 gallons, almost 3 gallons of fuel in there. And it was pretty bad. It was more the color of soy sauce than gasoline, a dark brown color, and it stank pretty bad. And then I was left with the tank, and I talked about sludge being at the bottom of the tank, and in fact, there was a lot of sludge in there. So what do you do with that? Well, you got to flush it out and then see what kind of condition the tank is left in when you're done. So I flushed out as much as I could, and then I put a couple of different products in there to clean up the rust. There was a lot of rust caked on to the bare metal inside the tank. I used something called Metal Rescue, which worked pretty well. It's been around the shop for a little bit here. It's theoretically, it's got a shelf life. It's a couple years old. I thought I'll give it a try. I didn't have enough to fill the tank, and I really needed to have something that would fill the tank, but I filled it about 2/3 the way full, and just to see what would happen. And it removed the rust very effectively. It was amazing how clean it could be. But I still needed to get to the upper part of the tank, and rather than buy more Metal Rescue, which is pretty expensive, I thought I would try using 30% vinegar, industrial grade vinegar. And that worked really well. I filled the tank to the top. I let it sit about a day and a half. And when I drained that out and rinsed it, the entire tank was very, very clean. So here's the tank. You can't really see in there because of the light, but instead of it being a brown rusty color, it's now a gray bare metal color. And it's really in great shape. There was no sign of leaking when I was putting all those fluids in, and it's completely clean. But what about everything that was in there? Well, I got something to show you today. I've never seen anything like this. I've removed rust from gas tanks before, and I've had a pretty good pile of rust, but never something like this. This is a 2-quart container like you'd get at a deli full of potato salad. And instead, it's full of rust flakes. I'll just show you here. It looks like coffee grounds, but all of this rust came out of that gas tank to the extent that I'm actually kind of surprised there's any metal left in there. But it's testimony to how thick the wall in that tank would have been, or was. Some tanks, different manufacturers may be thinner, but this is pretty heavy-duty steel, I think, because in spite of there being that much rust in that tank, and of course rust removes metal, there's still a good seal, and the tank holds liquid. So I'm hoping that it's going to be fully serviceable. I checked out these fuel valves, and the fuel valves, sort of like the switches, the levers move And, you know, the threads hold, looks like it's okay, but it is gummed up inside, and the tubes that pick up the gas inside the tank weren't in very good shape either. So, like with the switches, I decided to buy new, and I've got new OEM original valves for that tank. So we'll install the new valves. We'll have a clean gas tank, new valves, and of course, new fuel lines. We'll take a look here and see what I've got that's going to be going under the tank. I'm redoing the electrical system. I thought I might use the harness, the BMW harness that came with this bike, a brand new one. But the more I thought about it, I decided I'd rather modernize, not just replace the wiring, but modernize the electrical system. So this box right here that's bolted on the top of the frame, I drilled some holes and tapped them and mounted this box. This is called a Moto Gadget, that's the brand, from Germany, M-Unit. This M-Unit, it's basically a relay block, and it allows for very simple rewiring. We used it on the last project bike in the last series. It's located in the same place. There's plenty of room under the tank for it to fit. And I used it on the Moto Guzzi, that blue Moto Guzzi that I showed you at the beginning of the last series. And we also used it on that red BMW Scrambler. We had one on there as well. So it's a wonderful device. Anytime I'm going to redo the wiring totally, it's a good investment because it simplifies the wiring and it modernizes it. So we're going to have a relay block here. The switches, like those turn signal switches, they'll simply have one end that connects to the input side, and then there's an output side. So the power originally would have flowed through the switch to the light. In this case, when you use the M-Unit, it doesn't flow through the same way. All you're doing is making contact to ground with that switch, and that contact to ground signals the M-Unit that you want to energize whatever circuit you're operating with. So if you turn a left turn signal, it's going to energize the left turn signal circuit on this side, and it's going to send power from the battery and the alternator through this side of the block to the turn signal itself. So these switches will have very thin wires because there's almost no power, millivolts going through it, very, very little. And the power to actually run the appliance, the light in this case, comes through the right-hand side. So all new wiring, very nice devices. Highly recommend using them if you're going to do a project. I think it's a great way to go. It modernizes the electronics. So the bike can look stock. Those switches up top, they're going to look stock. They're going to have the stock functionality. But the wiring underneath will be modern, which I think is a better way to go. Continuing down here, I've got a new regulator rectifier. Now, all motorcycles and vehicles have to have a rectifier. A rectifier changes AC current that comes out of the alternator, changes it to DC. It's called rectifying, and it's a series of diodes in there. And this also incorporates a voltage regulator because the voltage that's put out by the alternator is going to move up and down based on engine RPMs and alternator RPMs. So you have to have stable voltage to charge your battery. It can't be too little, and it can't be, maybe more importantly, it can't be too much. It'll fry the battery. So the old bike, the original bike, had a rectifier that was underneath the cover here. It was a diode board. I've got one here somewhere. On BMW, they call it a diode board, but a diode board is a rectifier. A rectifier, it converts AC to DC via diodes. So the diode board would have sat here, and they work. Certainly, I could make it work. This one is probably okay. If not, I've got spares. But again, I wanted to modernize the system. And rather than have a rectifier here and a voltage regulator up here, which is an old mechanical style voltage regulator, I wanted to go with something new, solid state. And this is a regulator rectifier from a company called Rix. And this one right here in New Hampshire, I've used them before. I used them on the last project bike. I've used them on the Moto Guzzi and another BMW. It's a wonderful product made right here in New Hampshire. And it's got the appropriate leads to work on this particular motorcycle. This harness was made for this BMW. Now, it's quite long. These yellow wires only have to reach down to here. So I'm sure I'm gonna shorten these wires so there's no excess. But when they make the regulator, they're not assuming you're gonna put it in any one particular place. I could kind of bundle the wire up, fold it over, and just connect it, or I could shorten, and I'm gonna shorten it. That's what I typically do. I don't want to have any excess wire lying around the bike or looped around the bike. I'm trying to simplify things, so having excess wire hanging around wouldn't really do me any good. So I'll shorten these, but I got a good mounting point. It can stay cool under the tank. There's plenty of tank clearance. The M unit will have plenty of tank clearance. And then there's one more piece that's going to go on this side, similar to where this one's located, but it's going to be on the other side over here. And that is, if I can find it. Well, no, I'm not sure where I put it. That's the electronic ignition module. Electronic ignition module, I'm converting it from points to electronic ignition. A modern bike in 2025 would have electronic ignition. Most modern cars have electronic ignition, but the old ones still had points. But we can convert it to electronic ignition. It just requires the appropriate parts. So I bought a kit that has a module that will go here, and it connects on the front of the motor here on the drive shaft to a pickup and a disc that turns, and it will interrupt. It's an optical trigger, it's called. As the crankshaft turns, light will try to shine through. It won't be able to shine through. Then it will be able to shine through. And that effectively makes a switch. There's a light sensing module in there that can sense when the light is shining on it and when it's not. And as that rotates, that will it'll send a signal to the coils to send a spark to the cylinders. Oh, here's the module right here. So it's small. I knew I put it somewhere. It's small, and it will mount on this side of the frame. Oh, it's got a Velcro, and it'll also be secured by a zip tie. I made a plate for it too. It'll go here, which is really just the opposite side of where the regulator rectifier is located. Small module, and it connects to a harness that comes out of the trigger. It'll run up through a gap here under the engine cover, and then it will run to the module, and like I say, it'll send a signal to the coils to send a spark to the spark plugs. That's good to go too. So we'll have a modern ignition system. Also, I mean, still it'll be under the engine, under the front engine cover. You won't see it. So again, it's going to look stock, but it's not going to be stock. We're going to modernize it. I also removed the top engine cover. Now I've got the starter motor right here, and I've tested the starter motor. I hooked a battery up to it and put leads on it, and without having to go through the bike electrical system, I was able to energize the starter, and it cranked the motor. While I was cranking the motor, I decided to do a compression check on it. I've got a compression tester, remove the spark plugs, let the engine spin freely, but on one cylinder at a time, you put in a device that will register the pressure that is coming, that the cylinder is creating. And the compression is pretty good. It's not quite where I would like it. I've got 100 pounds on one side, 110 pounds on the other side. I'd like to see a little more, but I think that's going to be sufficient. Again, I'm hoping I don't need to take the motor apart, but my plan at this point is to not take the motor apart. We'll see how it runs. Like I say, it's sufficient. It may not be great, but it is sufficient. If I need to, I can take it apart. Also, after a motor's been sitting for a while, you may not get the best compression anyway. So I may find that after I run the engine and ride the bike, for 100 miles or so, or 50 miles even, and come back and check the compression again, I may find that the compression is just fine. So we'll let that go for now, and we'll see. So the starter motor's good, compression is satisfactory. I pulled the carburetors off. The carburetors I took apart. Last time I showed you the bowl, the float bowl from this right side carburetor, and it was actually very clean. Left side carburetor was the same. The carbs were very clean. The O-rings, there's a bunch of O-rings in there under various jets, and they were old and brittle and cracked, so I replaced all the O-rings. Did not replace the gaskets, the bowl gasket. I don't think I'm going to need to. And I cleaned all the jets, cleaned all the passageways, and the carburetor looks great. There's a rubber diaphragm under the top cap. There were no holes or perforations in that. Again, sitting, the rubber could age, I suppose, but it wasn't being used. So the carbs, I'm sure, look the same as they did the day the bike last ran back in the late 90s. Coils look good. No issues there so far as I can tell. I also removed there's a symmetrical cover over here, same as this, but it's on this side. That's off. And I took the air filter out. The air filter is a canister kind of a deal, paper filter with rubber ends. And dirty, but not filthy. Again, a reasonably good sign that the bike was well maintained. I'm going to put a new air filter in. And a lot of times when you take something apart like this, that's a compartment that was somewhat protected, an air filter box is pretty typical. You'll find mice, evidence of mice, nesting or droppings or whatever in there. I did not find anything. So again, it's testimony to the bike being well maintained and in good shape. So I replaced the air filter. We rebuilt the carbs. Continue moving back. We get to the back end of the bike. Under the seat, everything continues to look fine. I did remove that electrical box I talked about last time. I just cut it out, and we're not going to use that at all. If I want to have any kind of flashing in the brake light, which I've done on other bikes, especially if it's a small brake light, the Moto Gadget M unit can do that. You can program it to flash the brake light continuously, or what I like is to flash 8 times and then be steady bright. So we can program the M unit to do everything that extra box was going to do. This is modern. That was a little bit older. We're going to go with this, of course. I'll be getting a new battery too. The battery will sit right here. And then as I continue, after I get the front tire on, front fork put together, front end put together, and the front wheel on, I will tip the bike forward, still on the center stand, so that I can remove the rear wheel. The rear wheel, of course, is getting new tires, a new tire, and the spoke check like I showed you last time. By the way, this is the front brake hub, and it's a drum brake on this bike. I operated the brake on the last episode. You saw I spun the wheel and I gripped it, and the lever, the front wheel stopped. It looks to be in good shape. There's a little bit of dust, brake dust in here, nothing bad. And I can look and see how much material is left on the brake shoe, and there's actually plenty. It's not the same as new, but there's plenty of material left, so I don't even have to replace the front brake shoes. The rear, a lot of times the front and the rear will wear differently, and when someone's going to replace the brakes, they may replace the front and the rear at different times. So the rear is a drum brake as well. When I get that apart, I'll be able to see what those shoes look like. And if they look like this, will be great. They may be a little bit more worn because these may have been replaced more recently. Typically, the front brake does most of the work when you're braking, whether it's a car or a motorcycle. The front brake does most of the work because when you apply the brake, the weight of the vehicle kind of transitions to the front. And so there's more weight on the front wheel. There's more stopping power in the brake. The rear wheel gets a little bit light, and there's less power there because you can more easily lock it up. So we typically use the front brake more than the rear. And so the front brake shoes would wear out presumably faster than the rears. So the front may have been replaced, and the rear may still be original. I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. But this is in pretty good shape. I took the old turn signals off. They too, like I said, were clearly not stock. I've got the assembly over here. It fits. It came out of the box of old BMW parts. It'll go right on the fender. And the tail light that came off of the bike here, that too is perfectly fine. It's a OEM tail light, brake light combination. And the bulb works. Everything's good to go. So we're fine with that too. When I've cleaned really from here forward, all the frame tubes and engine and all that. It still looks old, but it's not oily. I'll do the same back here, and I'll inspect after I take it apart and make sure that the rubber boot that I was talking about last time, I'll make sure that's in good shape. I did test the brake light switch. The brake light switch makes contact appropriately. So the brake light switch back here functions fine. It's located right here behind this piece of metal, right down here. And I will change the fluid in the drive shaft, swing arm, and in the rear drive hub too. I did find that the plug that where you put the oil in the drive shaft, it looks like the hole is a little bit stripped. The threads are a little bit stripped, but I've got to work around for that, and I can make that function properly. Also, I did find, I mentioned last time there was no scrapes on the engine guard. The engine guards are super clean. They're obviously gone. The chrome is in great shape. There is kind of a crease here on this valve cover. There's no oil leaking. This is cast aluminum, and there's a bit of a dent right here. I'm going to pull the valve covers off. I'm going to retorque the cylinders and the heads, and I'm going to check the valve clearances. Valve clearances on that side I checked, just checked them. They look to be okay, but I'm going to retorque the cylinders and heads, and I'm going to do the valve clearances. So you have to retorque it first, then when you do the valve clearances. And I'll see what's going on the inside here. But I'm expecting that there may be, you may see evidence of a little push in, but I don't think we're going to see a crack because there's no seepage of oil. There would be oil under these covers when the engine's running, and there is no oil showing there. So I think we're in good shape. All of the cables, here's the clutch cable. I removed all the brake cables and throttle cables. They appear to be in pretty good shape too. Dirty, but they look to be serviceable. So I'll clean all those and lubricate them, and then we'll see if they function properly. Again, I'll replace things as necessary, but if the things don't need replacing, then we're not going to do it. And that's kind of where we're at on this bike so far. Again, it's continuing to look good. I think we're going to have a fine motorcycle here when it's done. I'll give you updates as I go along, but the next time you see it, we'll have the front end back together, maybe the rear wheel off if I find anything that is worth sharing with you, anything that I think is important or a surprise. But otherwise, I think that I've taken it apart as far as I need to, and really we're going to be beginning the reassembly. There's a lot involved in wiring, of course, and the headlight bucket, I'm going to have to do some work on that. I removed the bucket. There was a lot of fried wires in here. The bucket itself is kind of beat up. I'm going to sand it down and paint it. It's really the only thing I plan on painting. I want it to look good. And like I say, there's evidence of tape here, tape residue, where the headlight ring would have been held on. And we don't want to hold it on with tape. We want to make it so that it functions the way it's supposed to. The instrument sits in here. It's a combined speedometer and tachometer. Looks to be in great shape. All the bulbs it's lit, of course, so you can ride at night and you can see everything. All the bulbs in there function properly. It all looks good. It just showing its age. So we'll clean this up, paint this, and then we'll reinstall it. And then, of course, we'll be doing all the wiring. So I'll give you updates on that as we continue to go. So this is not as big a project as the last one. Last one, we took everything apart. We sandblasted the frame and painted it, and we did a lot of work on that one. But this one, I think, is going to be a nice companion to that, and that it's going to be essentially a very similar bike, if not the same bike, that would have been in its original condition. And this one's going to look like it's original, but it's going to be a daily rider. Every Wednesday night, if you're around in the Nashua area or the southern New Hampshire area, Wednesday nights, particularly in the summertime, out in Milford, if you're familiar with Milford, New Hampshire, there's the Oval right in the middle of town there. On the Oval, there's a place called the 101, and it's just named after Route 101, but it's kind of a craft beer and restaurant place, and they got a nice large parking lot out front. And every Wednesday night, especially in the good season, it's bike night over there. And you'd be welcome to come over and see these bikes, when they're done, and see a lot of other folks who have a lot of cool, often vintage and antique bikes that they ride, and it's a great event. So this will be something that I ride to bike night in Milford when the weather gets nice again, and I think it'll be a good conversation piece. That's one of the reasons I like these old bikes. They're great conversation pieces because you can explain the history. I've told you a lot of the history that I know anyway, of this bike having sat for 25 years. But it's a solid motorcycle, and I guess sort of like those Model Ts I talked about last time. If you take care of them, they can keep on running. Won't perform the same as a modern motorcycle will, but it'll keep on running. So that's it for this time, episode 2 of project number 2 on our 1972 BMW R75/5. I think it's going to be a great project. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please send us an email, milliard.moto@gmail.com. And I'm going to roast some coffee this afternoon. I talked about that last time. We got a coffee roaster here in the garage. I'm going to roast some coffee this afternoon. And I'm going to be visiting with a friend who's coming over too. So if you're in the area and you want to stop by and have a cup of coffee and talk about motorcycles, or you have a question about a project you're working on, send me an email. I'd be glad to have you stop by, and I'll try to answer whatever question you got. But that's it for this time. Thanks for watching. I'm David Schoneman, and we'll see you next time.